Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our the second part of our Cooperative Directors Virtual Forum. So the theme for today is elements of board oversight. And again, the silver lining of this virtual format, even though we miss being together in person, is that we get to share with directors from all around the state and the country. So we have people chiming in from many places, many corners, many co-ops. So thank you all for being here. So before we go ahead and get started, I'd like to do a couple of housekeeping items. Today's session will run for about 90 minutes. The three panelists are all seasoned co-op directors. We will go through a few. This session will be more of a facilitated question and answer with a moderator, and then we will open it up for questions from the audience. So please, if you have questions, put them in the chat. We will be monitoring the chat the whole time, and we'll direct questions at the speakers once they finish the sort of formal Q&A. After the Q&A session, we will do breakout groups with 4 to 5 people in them. They're a great chance to meet and network with other directors, as well as share your thoughts and experiences during the presentation and sort of ruminate on what the speakers shared. And then we'll do a quick reconvening at the end. So everyone's lines are muted. Again, submit questions in the chat. Just a reminder that the session is being recorded and will be posted on our website fairly soon after the program is completed. And there'll be Q&A and some breakout discussion groups at the end. So a little bit about the UW Center for Cooperatives. We're based here at UW-Madison. We do outreach, research, education on the cooperative business model. We also have a co-op development program that supports cooperatives that are interested, or groups of people that are interested in starting new cooperatives across the state. We began hosting these sort of peer learning based director forums in 2015 and have been organizing them in partnership with Cooperative Network ever since. So before we move forward, I'd like to hand it off to the representative from Cooperative Network to do a quick introduction of Co-op Network and what they do in our state and in Minnesota. So do we have?
Hi, yeah, thank you so much, Courtney. I'm Michael Wadig from Cooperative Network. If you were on last week, you heard my colleague Kristen Olson talk a little bit about the Cooperative Network. So I just want to do a quick introduction. We are a 2-state organization. We work in Wisconsin and Minnesota, representing cooperatives at the state, in the state governments. We represent 13 business sectors, all the way from ag to food co-ops to credit unions. So we have a broad swath of members. And like I said, we represent everybody at the in the state houses. We also hold some events and things. We've done a lot of virtual webinars this year, obviously because of COVID. And we just want to thank UWCC for letting us be a part of this and for their continued collaboration with us.
Great. Thanks so much, Michael. Great to have you here. And great to have a strong cooperative association representing our cooperatives in Minnesota and Wisconsin. So next up, we're going to do a quick poll. So I'm going to launch that poll just to better understand who is in the room. So please go ahead and weigh in what sector best describes your cooperative. We have a broad, a diverse cooperative community here in Wisconsin. I was just on a webinar yesterday talking about Wisconsin cooperatives in the context of sort of policy supports for cooperatives, and was really proud to get to talk about what great co-ops we have in our state. So it looks like, okay, interesting, slightly different representation from our last session last week. I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. So about 20% from agriculture, 28% from grocery cooperatives, 16% from housing, and then we've got some manufacturing and financial institutions or credit unions. All right, thanks so much for sharing. So I will launch the next poll here. Share results. Okay, so next question. How long have you served as a co-op director? Are you a new director? Have you been on the board for several terms? Please weigh in. they're still trickling in. Okay, so great. Actually, slightly more representation across the different categories this time. Last week we had mostly brand new directors and directors who've been with their with their cooperative boards for over 10 years. So still, again, the most common answer is new director, and then more than 10 years. But we have some more representation in that middle area too. So thank you all for being here. One of the things that I love about these conversations is that we have really great cross-sectoral representation. So there's an opportunity to learn from each other, to learn from other sectors. We also have very experienced directors and new directors. So, you know, new directors bring an infusion of energy, and some of those directors that have been around for a long time hopefully have a lot of wisdom to share. So thank you all for being here. And I'm really excited to introduce the 3 directors that will be part of the program today. They all have a great deal of experience serving on cooperative boards from different parts of the cooperative community. So I will go ahead and introduce them, and then I will hand things over to my colleague Kelly Maynard, who will moderate this session. So first we have Dorothy Harms. She has been a board member of Central Star Cooperative for 17 years, which is a Wisconsin-based cattle genetics co-op, formerly known as East Central Select Sires Cooperative. She has served as the vice chair and secretary treasurer for that board. She's also spent 9 years as a director of Select Sires Incorporated, representing Central Star Co-op. Select Sires is a federated cooperative of 6 regional cooperatives across the US. On that board, she has served as second vice chair, first vice chair, and is now currently the board chair. Dorothy and her husband Donald run Valley Springs Farm in Reedsburg, Wisconsin, where they raise both dairy and beef cattle, primarily on pasture. Our next speaker is David Lee. David Lee is the CEO of Imagine Milwaukee, which is Milwaukee's arts and culture service organization. He also serves as the vice president of the board of directors for Outpost Natural Foods Cooperative, one of the nation's largest consumer food co-ops. They have 4 locations around Milwaukee and annual sales around $45 million. David has been on the board of Outpost for about 8 years, including 3 years as the president of the board and 2 stints as vice president. During his tenure as the board president, David focused on strengthening the board's understanding and application of policy governance in oversight and strategic management. And lastly, we have Ole Olson, who is an electrical engineering graduate of UW-Madison, proud alum. He has worked for cooperatives for more than 4 decades and has been a worker owner at Isthmus Engineering and Manufacturing Cooperative for 30 years. He's committed to the cooperative movement, I can attest to that, and has served on the board of directors for the US Federation of Worker Cooperatives. He's also the current president of MadWork, which is a Madison Worker Cooperatives group here in Madison. So as you can see, a ton, I should add up all those years while they're talking and see if we get to 100 years of co-op board experience by the end. So thank you so much to Ole, David, and Dorothy for being here. And now I am going to hand things over to Kelly and ask the speakers to turn on their mics and cameras. Thanks so much.
Are we all right? We see you all and we hear you all. Thank you for joining. So Courtney gave some of this in your introductions, but I just was wondering, in order to orient the participants today, can you just each reiterate kind of the sector of your co-op, type of ownership, how old it is, and kind of the size of the membership and size of the board?
All right, I believe you wanted me to start, right, Kelly?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, okay. Again, I'm Dorothy Harms. I'm really, it's a pleasure to join you today to speak about Select Sires and Central Star Cooperative. So as was mentioned in the introduction, Select Sires is a federated cooperative. It is an agricultural cooperative providing elite cattle genetic products and services to dairy and beef producers since 1965. So just a little bit of history about Select Sires. In 1965, 4 regional cooperatives combined forces to place their bull stud production and semen processing at one central location. So the organizational structure of Select Sires provides the member owners or the member co-op or the regional cooperatives the opportunity to continue service within their respective geographical areas and maintain their own individual offices and staff. Their main objective is to provide the utmost in service to the farmer member owners. The Select Sires Board of Directors serves as a close connection between the member owners utilizing Select Sires on their farms and the management of Select Sires Inc. and the member cooperatives. Each of the board members have a working farm and are keenly aware of the needs that Select Sires should be meeting for their farmer owners. As well as each of those board members on the Select Sires Board sit on their member co-op boards. Select Sires is currently made up of 6 regional cooperatives across the United States. Recent member cooperative mergers have reduced the number from 9 to 6 member co-ops. Our current board size is 20 persons, but that will be reduced to 16 persons within the next 2 years, as we have a policy in place that has a maximum of board seats of 3 directors for each member cooperative. 2 years of transition is made for the board directors during those mergers. The member co-op ownership is based on a percentage contribution to U.S. sales, with a growing part of Select Sires business having to do with international sales as well. So that's a little bit about Select Sires. I'll hand it off to David.
Yeah, Oli and David, just quick orientation to your co-op.
Sure. So Outpost Natural Foods, as mentioned in the intro, started in 1970. It's one of the nation's largest consumer grocery co-ops, consumer-owned grocery co-ops. And our ends, and I think we'll talk a little bit about our ends in the panel. We exist to create or to provide access to our owners to a healthy and sustainable community. That's done through us ensuring the financial stability of our organization. So that's why Outpost is here, right? We want to make sure that that Milwaukee has access and markets to ensure that people have access to healthy foods and more sustainably produced local foods. We are 50 years old. Started in a small storefront in Milwaukee in 1970. Our GM has been with us. She just celebrated her 40th anniversary at the co-op. So we have long, stable leadership. I think 33 as GM. So it's been just a really long leadership journey for her, sort of building up the organization to where we are now, which is around 22,000 owners. They are able to buy a full share of the co-op for I think $250. And the board is made up of 9 board members. So we have that are represented as you must be an owner in order to run for the board. And the board is elected every year. 3 members of our board are elected every year in a cycle for a 3-year term. And I think, as I mentioned in the intro, or as Courtney mentioned in the intro, we have annual sales of about $45 million. The scale of our operation is we have 4 main stores, about 20,000 square feet throughout the Milwaukee area, and a commercial kitchen that provides the cafe foods and also the sort of consumer, the Outpost recipes that we sell in our cold cases and throughout the store. So that's us in a nutshell.
Thanks. All right, Oli.
Hi, can you hear me? All right, excellent. Welcome, everybody. Happy to be here, as Dorothy said, and David. So I'm with Isthmus Engineering and Manufacturing. We're a worker co-op that's in the manufacturing sector. The company was started in 1980 with 4 partners. It was a partnership when it started. It became a worker co-op officially in 1983. We build machines for manufacturing products. So if you're writing with a Bic pen right now, there's a good chance that we built the machine that made the Bic pen. And we make everything from soup to nuts, everything from car parts to medical devices. So a lot of different industries that we serve. We currently have about 80 employees that work here, of which 40 are member owners. 40 people have bought in. Our co-op's a little bit different than most others. Once you become an owner member, you're on the board of directors. So we have 40 people on our board of directors. We know that there's a limit to that. At some point, we'll have to go to an elected board. But so far, it's still working well for us. Currently, our board meetings are shorter than they were when we only had 10 members. In fact, they're about half as long. So we found ways to structure ourselves to make sure that everybody gets a vote. We consider ourselves a direct democracy, one member, one vote. So I've been a member since 1992, and I've served as president 4 times, and I've participated in many other capacities also. But I guess that's it for Isthmus.
Great. So I'm wondering if you, the first question, and how does your co-op provide clarity between the different roles of the governing board and management operations? Anybody can go first.
I'll go ahead. So I would say that the Select Sires Board provides the vision and direction for the co-op, and we demand our management to kind of carry out that vision in operations and strategic planning. I mean, that messaging is very clear at the board level. And I know David mentioned earlier about their managers. So our current CEO at Select Sires has been in that position for over 20 years. So again, you kind of start to develop a relationship. There's a certain set of expectations through all of that. Also, within our board, there are active board committees that have oversight in the audit committee, in our case, a farm and building committee, research and international committees. Each of those committees are chaired by board members, and so that the board of directors is fully engaged in knowing and understanding and oversight of the operations.
Yeah, I think for us, I would add to that we, as a co-op, we use policy governance, right, as a way to determine that clarity. And as Courtney mentioned in the introduction, I'd spend a lot of my time as president of the board a couple of years ago, getting our board aligned and having a deeper sort of resonance and understanding of the art of executing policy governance, right? So there has been, in the 8 or so years I've been on the board, just a lot of, I think, both reluctance to look under the hood on operational issues, but also desire to engage in sort of operational stuff from different members of our board, particularly with some of the newer members. And that's, I think it's sort of an interesting dance, right? This kind of like gray area between what's strategic and what is operational, and what that dance is between the board and our GM. And the way we've done it is just clarifying, continuing to kind of put back to the board, are these the policies you want to drive the desired result of creating a more healthy and sustainable Milwaukee? And if not, or if you do not believe that that operations are achieving the goals that we've set out, then it's incumbent upon us to work through policy development and that process with our GM to ensure that there is that clarity, right? That crystal clear clarity of what she interprets of our policies, and how she provides us data to show compliance or not. And I think this last year, with these last few years, have just been, I think, a very interesting time as it relates to the food industry, the grocery industry, and how that very sharp clarity is really important, so that we can thread the needle on some very tough issues that our industry's been dealing with.
So we're a little bit unusual in the fact that we govern mainly by committee. So it's basically a flat management system. And I think we'll get into it a little bit in some of the future questions here, but and it's pretty easy because we're a project-based company. Everything that we sell comes to us as a project, and we vote for a team to work on it. All the decisions made for those kinds of projects are completely separate from the decisions that our managers and our board make. And interestingly enough, our sales manager, we currently don't have a general manager. We haven't had a general manager in 10 or 12 years. We have an operations manager who handles stuff internally, but all the external decisions are made by the board, basically. Anything that affects us externally. We have committees that make recommendations to the board, but the board has final say on how we do it.
Great. So the next question, getting straight to the heart of policy, when any of your boards needs to craft a new policy, how detailed do you go, and how much, kind of room for interpretation do you leave to management?
I guess if it's okay, I'll just go ahead and start. Yeah. So I kind of thought about this question a little bit, and example that came to mind, several years ago, our cooperative was considering offering membership to international cooperatives outside of the United States. And at that time, I chaired that committee as the first vice chairman of the Select Sires board. And so we had a subcommittee of board directors, select employees and attorneys. And in that whole process, management presented options for the consideration, but that committee of board directors made their final recommendation to the full Select Sires board for approval. So all along that process, again, we look to management for sharing options, and it'll kind of help us think it through, but the final decision making is in the hands of the board.
So for us, we it's not a couple now, it is at this point, I think 6 years ago, went through and thinned out our policy register. And we did that in partnership with our general manager, so that in some ways, right, like we had a incredibly thick policy register, and we went and we thought that it was difficult for anybody to manage against that policy register. So we really sort of thinned it down, so that we could still have oversight over the right issues. And I would say that thinning down was probably driven a little bit too much on the consultant side, and I think a little less of our board had an insight as to what this meant. We didn't do I don't think we did the pre-work and necessary to sort of understand what this would mean, right? And I think to the question of like how specific we got in that process, it was pretty general. And I think as we've gone we've done some work over the last few years in trying to revisit our end statement, right? The sort of global ends about why we exist. The board has had some real challenging discussions on how clear they have to be and how much room for interpretation there should be. And then moreover, who writes the sub ends, right? So how do you get the other policies and other ways of understanding that you've gotten to that main end statement? And that is, as a leader of a nonprofit, as well in my day job, this whole thing about writing mission vision statements is my least favorite thing, right? Because it is always open to interpretation, and people always have some question about whether and means and is means is, and that is just not like I think a productive place for any leader to be in. And so I think my view on this, and this is simply my view, not the view of the Outpost board or anything else, but like I feel like if you can get to a marginal, or if you can get to a statement that the board feels good about and the GM feels like they have some room to operate in, because what you don't want to do is prescribe the policy so much such that there's no flexibility, because, I think this last year has shown us, your plans and your policies are only as good as the next day. And everybody feels okay about it. The real work is really in the interpretations and the data, right? The policy is the policy. How your GM interprets the policy and then provides the data to prove whether or not they are successful. I think that's the real work.
All right, I'll go next. I'm going to answer the same question. If your board needs to craft a new policy, how detailed do you go? Kelly, can you bring up the PowerPoint? Is that possible to share that screen? So a few years ago, it's inevitable if you have a board of directors, at some point you're going to have a personnel conflict, especially at Isthmus, where we have 40 board members. It's just inevitable that you're going to have a conflict. So a few years ago, we had a personnel conflict and we had no way to resolve it. So a few of us got together, we put our heads together and we came up, well, maybe we need a committee, like a human resources committee for the membership. And we put together a presentation to make to the board that basically was suggesting that we should form a committee to handle ways to differences that come between board members. So we laid out kind of a structure actually that Union Cab started with. They have a grievance committee. And so that's where we were headed with this. And so this is just like 3 or 4 slides that we presented to our board. This is just kind of a description of it. Can you go to the next slide, Kelly? So it talked about what power the boards, the committee would have. They could make short-term decisions, but the decision would only last until the next board meeting. So if, let's say that somebody did something inappropriately and needed to be disciplined, the committee could send them home until the next board meeting when the board would make the decision for discipline or termination or whatever was required. But the committee had no power to make any long-term decisions. And it turns out that once the board thought about it, the board said, well, wait a minute, a lot of our problems aren't necessarily personnel issues. There's other things that come up. So working back and forth, the board put together a committee to really think this through. And what we came up with eventually was what we call the Issues and Resolutions Council. And I think some of the questions coming up, I'll get into more detail of it, but it is not only to handle disputes between board members or managers. I applaud anybody that's a general manager for a co-op. There's just nuances about running a co-op that are difficult. So I applaud anybody in a leadership position that's trying to herd a bunch of cats. And it's more likely though, just because there's usually only one general manager and there's a bunch of board members, you're probably more likely that you're going to have problems with one of the other members and not necessarily just the manager. So this council that we put together was to handle all that. And it turned out, I'm glad we put it together a few years ago, because when COVID came up, this council that we put together handled all that for us, all the challenges that came with COVID and how it affected our business. It's not something our board normally handles. It's not something our HR committee normally handles. COVID was a new thing. So that what we call the IRC committee or council handled all that. We have a whole process. The board put together a charter to direct the committee on what was in scope and out of scope. I think we'll get into that in the next question or two. I saw in the chat, can you go back to the chat, Kelly? Somebody had put a question up about how do your board members address operations concern? Are concerns addressed directly with the general managers or brought to a board first for discussion and then taken to general manager? Everything you suggested is an option, but in our co-op, they can actually go to the council first and the council can help them work through the problem. It might not even make it to the board. So it really reduces the amount of time that our board spends on issues that can be resolved outside of the board meetings.
Dorothy or David, if you want to, either of you want to address that question from the chat. It was, how do your board members address operations concerns? Directly with GM, brought to the board first, other?
Well, I would say in our, and I would say in my experience in both boards, you know, Central Star and Select Sires, those issues are brought directly to the general manager. I think we've always kind of taken the stance that the general manager is answers to the board, and it's not our position to micromanage, you know, the operations if it comes to something that's, you know, having to do with an HR or employee issues. So that's the way that we handle that.
I think this is such an interesting question, and just to reflect a little bit on Oli's committee structure, I think, you know, given the uniqueness of the co-op, of the Isthmus co-op, and the uniqueness of ours, like we are as a board, we try to draw that really strong bright line between what is board work and what is operations work, right? Because I think in the past, in the Outpost growth cycle, when all the board members were all in the business of the co-op, it just made board meetings difficult and long, and nothing got done. So that's part of the reason why we instituted this policy governance structure way of governance. And yet at the same time, that has sort of created this divide, right? And I think there are issues that come up often to the question that was posed through the chat. An operational issue, at what point does it rise to a strategic issue? And I think that is kind of this question that we had to deal with issues that have happened over the past. And I think the way we've dealt with it has been really sort of ad hoc, because we have not, I think so. If there's an operational issue, you know, I would give a sort of roundabout example, right? If there's an operational issue that can have a long-term effect on the brand or the sort of intellectual assets of the brand that's out there, that to me, that's a strategic issue that the board has to get involved in. And yet we also have policies that our general manager rightly, you know, reports on how she is protecting the brand, right? So I think the way that we have gone about doing it is we will bring it up if an issue is brought to us, whether it's if an issue has been brought to us, we will bring it up in a board meeting and have a discussion with the general manager in closed session about it. And I think we've never gotten to this point where we've either rewritten a policy to address an issue that has come up, or kind of taken that next step of, like, you know, what is a remediation course? And I think that is the insight that I got from Oli's presentation, is that, like, there's this really interesting work that they're really trying to do, right? Because all of their members are automatically board members. They're trying to figure out how to share power, right? And that's what we're talking, that's what we're trying to do, right? Is we're trying to figure out how the general manager and the board responsibly shares power in a way that is not negative, right? Like, that's actually a very positive thing, that as a group of leaders, we have a lot of power in shaping the long-term sustainability of the cooperative movement. How do we delegate and share power in a way that is productive for the enterprise and for the broader movement? I think that is, you know, as people, I think for us, our board members really have been trying to lean into that, right? Like, lean into a little bit more of, like, what it means to kind of take up a little bit more space in the boardroom, to ask the harder questions, to kind of, like, again, dance in that gray area between what is traditionally operational and what is traditionally strategic.
The next question that I have for you all is just about, you've all addressed a little bit the importance of the relationship, but and a positive relationship between the board and the general manager or CEO. In your co-ops, what would you say is the pattern of communication between the board and your general manager or CEO? You know, how and when do you communicate? What are there rules around that, and how does that impact the relationship?
Okay,
go ahead, Dorothy.
With Select Sires, one of the things that our CEO has instituted is a biweekly report on co-op operations to the full Select Sires board. So that kind of keeps a pretty routine communications going forth. The Select Sires National Board meets 4 times a year. So, you know, a lot can go on quarterly within the operations, and it just kind of keeps everybody updated as far as, you know, some of the things that are going on within the business. The CEO also meets with the executive leadership team. So that would be myself as board chair and the first and second vice chairs. Oftentimes to kind of vet out proposed projects or look at the preliminary budget. Again, it's been a very open two-way communication. But in my experience, one of the things I think that's very important is not necessarily lean entirely on the CEO. I think it's very important within board meetings to have reports from key senior management. I think oftentimes that just validates the information that's coming from that CEO. I know just in some of my conversations with other board chairs, that can be a problem if they lean entirely on the CEO as that source of information about operations.
Yeah, I think for us, we're probably a little bit more rule following insofar as, like, I think our board has really taken the view of, like, if the board chair is the main conduit between the board and the GM, that we typically speak through our board chair, and that's I think that probably makes our GM's life a lot easier as opposed to managing all these different voices. One of the really nice things about paring down our policy register about 6-7 years ago is that we had been a little bit the pattern of communication actually wasn't that great between the GM and us, partially because our board chair at the time was also sort of an under communicator. And so in our revision of our policy register, a new policy was made in that, like, any important issue that the GM had, she had to keep the board apprised of important issues, right, that were happening in the organization. And so that is instituted an FYI now that the board gets every month as part of our board package. And then also, if there's anything that sort of rises to something that we ought to know about, she'll just fire off an email, and then she reports on that, right, in the policy report on communication to the board, which has really changed the way that she's interacted with the board writ large, despite the fact that the board writ large communicates with her through the president.
Anything to add, Oli?
The way we're structured, so we have a sales manager and currently an operations manager. On a day-to-day basis, everybody that works here answers to those people, and we see them on a regular basis. Maybe not every day, but if we're working in the building, we probably do. So we have frequent interaction with them, and we report to them on a normal basis. Every other Monday, we have a board meeting, and that's when those two managers report to the board. So they answer to all the board of directors, and that's kind of our check and balance. And that's how we know that that we're getting full communications, and everybody understands what's going on. So.
Great. So some of this was addressed in the communication question, but what kind of mechanisms, processes do your co-ops have in place for oversight of your general manager or CEO? Dorothy?
Okay, so at Select Sires Inc., we have an annual written evaluation of the CEO by the full board of directors. So all 20 members weigh in on that. It's an evaluation form that's we've used for several years, and we also include key management employees that are direct reports to CEO, again, to kind of give the board some perspective on what they're seeing, as our CEO's efforts in leading the business. The board chair then generally reviews that summary of the CEO evaluation, and his compensation is then decided based on this evaluation. Admittedly, I will say that going through this process, it's been more subjective than the targeted goals. Looking at like targeted goals of meeting profits and budget levels, but I think that's something definitely, I think in my position as board chair, that we're going to be looking at more critically going forward.
Yeah, for us, I would just add, we do basically the same thing for an annual review of our GM. But as part of that, we also look at the past 12 months compliance in monitoring reports. So, how they've done insofar as like the different monitoring reports that the GM has to report on based on a schedule, right? Based on all of our policies. And also we have a bonus schedule regarding how the GM that's paid out on the achievement of the strategic goals of the organization. So we have a list of things that the GM wants to make progress on over the course of the years, these strategic outcomes, and based on how she does in the progress of on these 11 strategic areas, we will pay out a portion of her annual compensation and bonus.
For us, our oversight mechanism is it used to be the board. But because of the Issues and Resolution Council, we use that not only for the managers, but all board members and all employees too, for that matter, if something comes up that's not normal. So that council has direction. The council has got 6 people on it. The operations manager is part of it, the human resources manager, and whoever the current president is that year, along with 3 elected members that are on a 3-year term. That one new person comes on board every year. So that's the council that has oversight over our group. We kind of want it to be the council of elders. It's not something that we would take a brand new board member and throw into that committee. We want the committee to be someone that we trust, that's been around for a while, that understands how the co-op works. And that has a level head making decisions. So it's kind of the goal when we elect somebody into that council. But so that's how we govern it. I will say our sales manager has been with us for 20 years, something like that. And at the time, we weren't allowing our managers to become members. So our sales manager is not a member of the co-op. He carries an incredible amount of influence. And we have a bonus structure set up for him based on how profitable we are. So it's his goal to make sure that he can sell stuff that we're profitable with. Our operations manager is a member and does get a vote, but the sales manager does not.
So some of this is, part of the oversight, but if there's, based on expectations or goals laid out in an annual plan or strategic plan, if expectations are not being met, how does your board act as enforcer with management, GM, whomever, if you do?
Well, my response to this is probably not going to be necessarily advice, but maybe just kind of our own, presenting some of our own challenges within a federated cooperative structure. I think one of the things that we find is there seems to be once in a while challenge between select sires management and then management employees of the member co-ops, and who considers themselves the boss. And so I think there are times that the farmer board members find themselves kind of caught in the middle because they wear both those hats. So I know that's one of the things that we've been kind of trying to work through as far as, again, when a board member sits on the Select Sires board, they need to address the issues at hand for the overall federated cooperative across the country. But we sometimes kind of get caught up with people that are trying to also represent their own regional cooperative issues first in that. So again, I'm not sure I have any answers, but I just wanted to kind of share that from the federated structure.
I am super interested to learn about what Oli has to say about this, given the structure. And I would just support. I think to add to Dorothy's thoughts. I think one of the advantages of having a GM that's been with the co-op for 40 of its 50 years is that we have incredible trust that her that she wants to do, that everything she does is in the best interest of the co-op, right? So that's sort of that is kind of like already a little bit like, it's probably a little bit different for some maybe younger co-ops or places where you might not have that history. And I think the downside of that is that it can be hard to have tough conversations, right? I'm not talking about being an enforcer, but like when there are opportunities for growth, potentially, how does a board that is coming in and out, I'm the longest tenured board member now at 8 years, and like that's a sand right in the hourglass of our general manager's time and leadership of our organization. So how do you have those development conversations and with somebody who has that kind of stature? And I think it's possible. And I think this is not about being an enforcer, but it really is about how do you, as leaders of your co-ops, as board members, create a culture of having open conversations that are strategic and that people can feel safe in, right? I guess the term, right, is safe strategic conversations where people know that nobody's getting fired or whatever it might be, right, that might activate people, but that you can actually have a conversation with your general manager that and this is like the thing that nobody wants to do, right? This is why people don't want to be in HR, right? Like this is the tough stuff that helps to and I'll speak for me leading my organization. Like I hate doing that with my employees, right? If their expectations aren't being met, and I'm their direct boss, right? So I think this is just, I think the thing to remember is that it's human nature, right? To like want to shy away from these conversations. And so that having been said, I want to learn from Oli is how you all manage this.
So I appreciate everything you said, David. It is a challenge, and it is, well, some people want to be in HR, but most people don't. It's people just want to do what they're good at and ignore the issues if they can. But that's exactly why we put together the IRC committee. So I mentioned our committee has 6 people on it. If there's a dispute or something needs to be done and it gets passed to that committee to resolve or to make a recommendation to the board, if somebody on the committee is involved in the dispute, they have to recuse themselves. That's why we have 6 people on it. If the dispute is with our operations manager, he has to recuse himself, and the other 5 members of the panel will do an investigation, make a recommendation, or find a solution to present to the board. And then the board will, get a yay or nay vote, or maybe ask the committee to do more research or whatever. But it's our council that handles those issues. We do have a structure for being engineers. Everything has to get written down, and we have to overthink everything. But we do have a way of presenting issues to the boards and having the board, I don't know if we have time for this. Kelly, can you bring up the project charter? If something pops up and we want the board to approve us fixing it somehow, we've had people trained in project management professionally. So we have professional project managers now, and they came up with this. It works great, but it's we put together a project charter, present it to the board. This is an example of one that was used to start the IRC committee. So it's actually a document. It's a one-page document, front and back. You define who's on the team that's going to research it. You define what the problem is. You give a description of what the problem is, or what the project will be to solve it. You define who the stakeholders are. And then you define what's in scope of what you're trying to fix. Who does it affect? What the deliverables are, and what the schedule is for getting stuff done. Anything that gets presented to the board is going to go through that process. And if it takes more than one page to define what the problem is, it's too much. You need to be able to state it clearly. You need to define what the problem is, who's involved, what good is going to come out of it, and what the scope is. Once we started doing this, it took a while to get used to it, but now people can think about this as they present stuff to the board, and the board knows to direct this to get things solved, it can be anything. It can be, we have one of these charters for an energy committee. We have it for the finance committee. We have, it's well defined what is in scope and what's out of scope.
If I can just put a button on this, and Oli's and Dorothy's comments through this whole panel really sort of like clarified this for me, right? If it's not like extremely clear at this point, I think, we think of oftentimes as cooperatives as like these fun places where people like cooperate and work together. But the actual work of that is very difficult, right? Cooperation is hard. And especially in a way that makes everybody feel included and are aligned on goals, and that kind of blocking and tackling work of cooperation and is just really difficult. And I think to be super clear on it, whether it's through policies or whether it's through these project charters that Oli has shared, I think these are tools, right, to be clear about how the expectations for how people are cooperating. It's not like a soft, fun thing, right? It actually takes time and work and care and dedication and clarity.
You nailed it. That's exactly right.
Yep, ditto here too. Thanks, Dave.
I'm gonna pull up another question from the chat. So we have several folks joining who are from much newer co-ops, younger co-ops than yours. And so if something comes up where there's not a policy in place yet, or a policy that directly addresses it, do you work to create a policy first, or does the GM or staff or somebody wing it until a policy is put in place?
Just my response to that would be, again, it depends on the urgency of the decision that needs to be made. But I think oftentimes it's important to kind of take a step back and put that policy into a committee to be kind of worked out, because I think oftentimes when you make that decision, you set precedent. And I think once you've set that precedent, it's very difficult to kind of go back and, oh, well, we need to make policy, and the policy that's not quite what we meant by that, so I really would recommend, and that is to, take the time to set up that policy, within a committee structure, to kind of help, guide the board going forward, because it's always, those guide rails that you can kind of set for the board going forward, that's going to make it an easier job as a board member.
I would mostly agree, and also I'm coming at this. I'm putting on my work hat, right? Like, we are at Imagine a small startup nonprofit, and if my board said, "Hey, we want you to write a series of policies to address a number of different areas," I would say, you know what, I appreciate that, and if I were in your shoes, I would want that. But because of our life stage in our organization, we really want to be able to have flexibility and move fast, right? And so so I think you have to be, I would just say, be judicious on figuring out, like, where do you give your governance or your operational structure enough space to play and work and be able to develop and grow in unexpected ways, with having the structure in place such that, to Dorothy's point, you're not making bad precedents and just having all kinds of weird, crazy stuff where you sort of have something unmanageable after a certain amount of time.
Yeah, I agree with Dorothy again. Also, it depends on how important the issue is, whether we would form a committee or not. I might have jumped the gun on showing that project charter, because that's exactly what the project charter is for. Is if something comes up that we see is going to be a problem that we have to have a policy for, we'll fill out the project charter, select a committee to work on it, and it'll be a formal process. It will be something that's ad hoc, done in the dark. Everybody will know about it and will know what the scope of the work is. And I will share that document, by the way. People were asking about it, and I'll do you one better. I'll give you a couple other examples along with a blank one that you can make generic and use it for yourself. So
thanks, Oli. So another question from the chat. From Robin, from a small co-op with a GM who's pretty new to policy governance, are there any suggestions on how to help the GM fully understand her role in interpreting and reporting on the policies versus the board telling her how to interpret the policies?
What a great question. Because again, I think that's the dance, right? And I think just at a very high level, I would say, if I were in your shoes, I would say I would try to frame the interpretation as like the moment of freedom for the GM, right? Like, you have policy that does X, Y, Z. How do you interpret that? Like, that is solely the GM's role, right? Is to interpret that policy and how that's being applied. And so now freedom's of course not you're free to do anything you want, right? It actually is you're absolutely accountable and responsible to determining how you interpret a policy in a responsible way. So I think, if I were doing that coaching, I would say to that GM, like, what a great opportunity you have to really outline your vision based on these policies that the board has set forth for you at a very high level, right? And your policies ought to be written, I think, in a way. And I don't know what the range is for folks who've done the policy governance crash course, but it's really counterintuitive. I think a best practice, right, is that policies are written in the negative, right? The GM must not allow this or must not do this, and that's super counterintuitive, because we want to write policies that empower, and when they're written in that way, it feels like they're disempowering. But the opposite is actually true, because if you outline the guardrails of what you can't do in policy, everything else is possible, right? So if I must not crash my car in going to the co-op, I can go anywhere, right? So long as I don't crash the car. That's sort of the way I've been taught in understanding the writing of policy, and then also the interpretation of policy.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to the experience that GM has had with cooperatives in general. I mean, the cooperative business model is definitely a different business model than private corporations or publicly held companies, and as far as how much coaching that GM is going to need and that. But I mean, I've seen some, in Select Sire's instance, the current GM did not come from a cooperative business. But he had all the knowledge about genetics business that he brought into it. But again, he wasn't afraid to help the cooperative think differently and how to strategically place themselves to be a competitor, within the AI industry. So you can kind of use that, like David said, kind of use that to your advantage, because then they're not necessarily limited to, okay, this is the way the co-op always did it.
Yeah, I have a hard time answering that question, because currently we don't have a general manager. We haven't had one for 12 years, and we don't do policy governance at the moment. So, but response to what Dorothy just added, it is difficult for people to come in that don't have any cooperative background and be a general manager at a co-op. And we had issues with that years ago. Thankfully, we finally were able to hire a general manager that used to work for one of our customers. So he was already aware of what we did, how we did it, and liked what he saw. We were able to hire him. So we have a general manager now that's familiar with how co-ops work, and it's been very helpful.
Thank you all. So I'm gonna share my screen again to show that we're gonna move to the breakout rooms now. And so Megan is gonna do this automatically. So you'll be put in a group. And the point here is, when we used to do these forums in person, these were kind of tabletop discussions, a chance to network, meet people from other co-ops and other sectors. So we don't want to be too prescriptive about this. These are some, you can introduce yourselves. These are some potential questions to get the discussion going. But we do hope you'll use this as an opportunity to connect with other directors. And our speakers are going to be part of those discussion groups. I don't know totally where they'll end up. So yeah, I think take it away, Megan. And we will come back at the end just for a quick closure from Courtney.